Good evening to you all and welcome to the meeting of the Housing and Community Select Committee. I'm Councillor Kasim Ali, the chair of the Select Committee. The government regulation that allowed local authorities to hold formal council and committee meetings remotely has expired the 6th of May 2021. Therefore, this meeting is being held here in present and in person, and those who are here can only participate. The event is also streamed live on YouTube. Members of the public and the media are welcome to watch this meeting remotely and listen to the discussion taking place. May I take this opportunity to remind you about the face masks. Please do wear your face masks all the time unless you are called to speak and then put it on. We also can see the social distancing of the meeting. This meeting is being held in compliance with the government's COVID-19 regulations. So we have a glass dividing. So please do remain seated when you're speaking so that we can make sure we can cover the distances at the same time. It will be compliance with COVID-19 regulations. I'll take this opportunity to welcome those who are present in the meeting at this chamber and those who are watching online and on YouTube. It's only fitting to start with this meeting to remember those we have lost and be silent for 72 seconds. And because of the Grenfell tragedy has affected us all, both in the north and the south and the whole country indeed. So the 72 seconds to remember those we have lost starts now. Thank you. I wish to make a short statement about Grenfell and what had happened on that night. Most of us have not been there, or at least haven't been at the council, working with the council, and some of us have taken the duties on board since the Grenfell tragedy. So, and it's the 4th year for this disaster that we're still remembering as it happened yesterday. On that Monday morning, I came personally from the Al-Manar Mosque. It was Ramadan. We were all fasting during the day, and in the evening we went to go for prayer as a tradition is. And then on my way back from the mosque, and I lived about 500 meters away from the disaster itself, I've noticed people running and also the flames. It was, I think, about just before 1 or around 1 o'clock. Exactly, I can't remember the time. As if the whole world collapsed, I can see what had happened. And actually, I was born in a country where in my early years, I've experienced civil war, but I have never seen people dying and asking for help that I personally could not help. It was the only time that I've ever witnessed in my whole life, families, children, elderly, adults, you name it, dying in the tower, which I cannot go there and support. And it was shocking for me, despite what I have seen in life. And it was the first time ever to hear voices until they're being silenced by the fire. Imagine those who have lost, those who were families and friends and relatives and wives and children and uncles and moms were there and they couldn't help. I was just there as a resident, as someone who feels for the community, but imagine those who were standing with me in the evening, but on the night, in the early morning of that night, and they can hear their sons and their children, and they can't do anything about it. It's a tragedy that I hope that will never happen again, and it's a tragedy that I would not wish for even the worst enemy of humanity. But we've learned something about it. We've learned coming together. We've learned communities working together. We've learned a community that feels they live apart. They thought they had not that connection, but after Grenfell, we all felt that connection, and we appreciated a lot more each other. And I always like to thank the firefighters who were there at that night and supported and went to risk their lives to support and get many people out of that building that was, in flames. And I was remembering as if it was last night when I saw it on Monday last week, and the firefighters are standing on Labrador Grove on either side and thanking for those who were doing the silent work. It's also an opportunity to thank those who've done silent work. I'm not going to say who is responsible and who is not responsible. We will wait for the inquiry to come up with that. But we know the fact is that the cladding, that who made the cladding, the companies are still here. The decision makers, so be it, they may not be in the council, but they're still here. And the people who have suffered and lost their loved ones are still here. What's only missing is justice, and I hope that will come to the day. But I would like to thank, just to finish off with that point, I would like to thank those who have taken on the responsibilities after that and ever since the fire, trying to make sure this council realizes what had happened and keep changing and keep going until we have zero tolerance to the fire or anything else. And officers who have joined us ever since and those who have taken responsibilities, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Scrutiny Committee and continue to do what you do for our communities. On that note, I would like to move on to the second item of the agenda. That's apologies for absence. Of course. The minutes of the agreement, you say? Oh, of course, yes, item. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. As you may imagine, once you talk about the disaster, although personally I have got loved ones who passed away, but those who have lost their loved ones, it's always our prayers and thoughts are with you, and my apologies of missing the first item of the agenda, which is to remind and take a note the membership of the chair, the membership of this Scrutiny Committee, the chair and the vice chair, and I wish to ask the select committee members to note that. Do we all note that one? Thank you. The membership of the chair and the vice chair of this select committee. Yeah, the membership of the committee, the membership of this committee, the chair and the vice chair of this committee, as it was being decided on the 26th of May 2021, in fact last month. So we all know that. Thank you. Now the right item is back, and Councillor Greg Hammond. Yeah, it will be on, just keep trying, it will be on. I'll remove.
Oh, there we are, it's working now, so good. May I, Chair, pass on apologies from firstly Councillor Jackson. Her app has pinged and she's in isolation at the moment. But she has passed on she had some written questions informed by her experiences in Chelsea Riverside, and they're actually beyond what's on this agenda, but she's passed them on to you and to Anna, and I'm sure they'll be passed on to the lead member in due course for answer. And secondly, Councillor Bennett sends his apologies. He and I both had the same conflict tonight. He's there, I'm here, so he's apologised there and I've apologised there.
Thank you. I think that was a good division for you to be here and for him to be there. So thank you, Councillor Greg Hammond, the Vice Chair for this committee. If I move on to the item 3, the declaration of interest, anyone wishes to declare interest relating to the items of tonight? I take your silence as no. A4, minutes of the previous select committee meetings. I hope that you have all read, and if there is any thing to update or to talk about, please raise your hand and we will take them forward. Thank you. I take your silence as agreed, and I will sign the minutes in due course. Item 5, we have a guest and a speaker. She's a researcher, and her name is Dr. Connie Smith, previously from University College London, UCL, but currently at UKRA RI, a Future Leaders Fellow at the Social Anthropology and the Manchester Urban Institute at the University of Manchester. I just want to make a quick introduction for Dr. Connie Smith. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Connie Smith to this evening's meeting to talk her expertise that centers the impact of social housing and neighborhood design, as well as social support networks relate to the sense of place and belonging. Her research will discuss that she will discuss the research that has been undertaken since 2019 in North Kensington and also in Tottenham, with several residents associations, community groups, faith organizations, as well as local residents. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Connie Smith to speak for up to 15 to 20 minutes, and then hopefully there will be a question and answer session for about 10 minutes. Dr. Smith, please.
Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. It's a great privilege to be here and to speak to you all. And thank you, Councillor Ali, for that very poignant introduction and a powerful reminder of the issues that we're dealing with and why we're all here. And I think some of those themes will probably be echoed in this talk. Great. So as Councillor Ali has already mentioned, my name is Dr. Constance Smith, Connie Smith, and I'm a social anthropologist from the University of Manchester. And I've been leading a qualitative research project about neighbourhood landscapes and social change in London, and specifically in Tottenham, in Haringey, and North Kensington here in Kensington and Chelsea. This project explores local residents' ideas about urban success and failure, what makes a good or desirable place to live, the challenges they face in achieving the kinds of lives they want to lead. It takes a place-based approach, which means that it starts from people's lived experiences of their neighbourhoods and works from the bottom up. And since early 2020, I've been doing the North Kensington stage of this project, and some of the emerging themes have been around the legacy of the Westway, changing community spaces, challenges of gentrification, as well as housing and, of course, the aftermath of the Grenfell fire tragedy, and what all of these different aspects have meant for North Kensington's rich history. So aspects of the research had, of course, to be put on hold at various points during the last year because of the lockdowns, but the project has also been able to incorporate some aspects of the pandemic and its effects into the research, and I'll talk a bit more about that. As Councillor Ali mentioned, we have been meeting with community organisations working on issues related to housing, community, public space, to understand the challenges that they seek to address, as well as their visions for the future. And these have included food banks, advice surgeries, faith groups, residents associations, as well as local residents and key figures such as community leaders, councillors and tenant representatives. And I met with some of you in the room, and I look forward to meeting more of you too as I progress. So I just want to say that this research is very much ongoing, and I welcome any feedback or suggestions of things to follow up. Part of the commitment of the project is to generate research that is useful and valuable to the communities who are involved, and that it doesn't just disappear into the void or behind an academic paywall. And this can take various forms depending on what comes out of the research and what people feel would be most useful. So just to give one example, in Tottenham, I'm working with local residents to develop a mobile mapping app to celebrate local forgotten histories, and this is very much their idea and innovation. And we're using this app and the maps that it develops to develop neighbourhood walks to get people moving after lockdown, whilst also showing that even apparently insignificant streets are rich sites of heritage. So I'd really value your ideas. The project covers quite a lot of ground, so just to introduce the key themes. So firstly, making and managing home, thinking about housing beyond shelter. Secondly, taking action, which is about community networks and neighbourhood support systems. Third is a sense of place, which focuses on landscapes and public spaces. Fourth is about displacement, relocation, demolition, and forgotten histories. And 5 focuses on the future, hope, rebuilding, transformation, and also limitations. And now perhaps we can add 6, which is also the effects of the pandemic on many of these. So given the short time today, I'm going to focus primarily on the first and second themes. But having said that, the main thing I want to emphasize today is that housing can never be understood in isolation. And I realize you are the Housing Committee, so that might not be quite what you want to hear. But as I'll go on to stress, secure and affordable housing really underpins many aspects of quality of life, of resilient neighbourhoods and strong places. So by starting with lived experiences of housing, one very significant result that has come out so far has been about how local residents connect their challenges to a much longer history. The Grenfell Tower tragedy, of course, brought many housing issues into drastic focus, not just here, but around the country. And while this has been a repeated subject in interviews, perhaps inevitably, almost everyone has emphasised not only the ongoing housing crisis in London, but also a much longer social history of community and campaigns for housing and neighbourhood identity. And these go back through campaigning to stop housing demolitions to build the Westway, to the impact of the Second World War on housing, and several people have even discussed forms of urban regeneration taking place in the Victorian era in this area. And these are just a few example quotes on the screen. And I think it's powerful how these longer histories have affected contemporary concerns. An interesting example comes from the Latimer Road area, around the histories of women who made their living doing laundry, and subsequent campaigns on and off through the 50s to the 80s to save the Silchester public baths and wash houses. And these became, in many ways, a starting point for forms of local resistance and campaigning against gentrification. And I think this is something that actually figures very strongly in the RBKC archives, and here's 2 images from that history. And what's significant here is that people understand their contemporary challenges with housing as emplaced. That is rooted in place, rooted in local history, and part of that history is a sense of being sidelined or being marginalised or not having a voice. Terrible tragedies such as the fire, therefore, cannot be understood in isolation, but it's about how they emerge from these longer histories. This kind of deep-rooted sentiment indicates both a strong sense of place and belonging, but also one which is perceived as under threat from urban changes such as gentrification and many others. One result from the interview analysis so far is also how far residents stress that access to affordable quality housing, social networks and public space underpin their capacity for quality of life, and how, when these are not in place, day-to-day strategies of living are very precarious and stressful. And this is quite significant because it reinforces at a qualitative neighbourhood level what statistics-led research around the UK has also demonstrated. And I refer here to work done by Sir Michael Marmot, who some of you may be familiar with. He runs the Institute of Health Equity at UCL, and he's also a very prominent figure in the social determinants of health research and advises the UN and many other organisations. And this quote here that comes from his most recent report, Build Back Fairer, the COVID-19 Marmot Review, states that the real determinants of health lie outside the healthcare system, in the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. Inequity in these conditions drives health outcomes. So research on the social determinants of health has shown how health outcomes are closely related to levels of deprivation in an area and to certain key social determinants, conditions in early years, education, employment, income, and pertinent for our interests today, quality and security of housing. So it's no secret that in London, unaffordability and insecurity of tenure are increasingly acute challenges. It's also no surprise, therefore, that livelihood insecurity is very high. High housing costs affect people's ability to have good quality of life. It reduces the income available for heating, food, and other necessities that are essential for good health, and it causes high levels of stress. Overcrowded living conditions and poor quality housing are associated with higher risks of mortality from COVID-19, as well as other diseases, particularly respiratory diseases. And there are also significant correlations between housing and mental well-being. So in all these different ways then, housing can both help and hinder communities. It's a foundation for a quality of life that goes far beyond short-term or practical concerns about having a roof over one's head. It helps people to access work, to plan for the future and their children's future, and allows them to put those plans into action. On the other hand, insecure tenure, temporary housing, undermine health, quality of life, and aspiration more broadly. So thinking about housing lockdown and the implications for health. So it's well known that overcrowded housing raises the risk of COVID infection, and that has been shown through several studies throughout the past year. And data also shows that poor quality housing can increase the risk of worse symptoms, as well as the risk of dying from COVID-19, especially those with pre-existing conditions. Living in damp conditions also raises the risk of respiratory illnesses such as asthma and COPD, which in turn raise the risk of more severe COVID-19 symptoms. People shielding, self-isolating, or locked down in poor quality housing therefore have a higher risk of experiencing poor outcomes from COVID-19, as well as an increased risk of other poor health outcomes, mental health problems, and social isolation, compared with people experiencing social distancing in good quality housing. The disparity in death toll from COVID-19 across different areas of the UK has been shown to be rooted in inequalities in social and economic conditions that existed before the pandemic, but which were then amplified by it. Unsurprisingly then, those in the most precarious situation before March 2020 have tended to struggle the most. And the project has shown that people's experiences of lockdown are closely related to the conditions of their homes. Put simply, those living in overcrowded, poor condition housing are more likely to experience stress during a lockdown and find it difficult to cope. So we might ask then, what is the state of housing insecurity? So new data from Shelter shows that over 250,000 people in England were homeless and living in temporary accommodation during the first stages of the pandemic. This is the highest number of people in TA for 14 years and close to double the number of a decade ago. More than 2/3, or 68% of those, are living in London, and this equates to 1 in every 52 people in the city. And it's no secret that this borough faces one of the biggest challenges when it comes to unaffordability of housing. According to government data, it is now the wealthiest borough in the UK. But research from Shelter shows that it's also one of the most deprived when it comes to housing. So Kensington and Chelsea has the 3rd highest rate of people living in TA in the UK, which is 1 in 29 people in the borough, which I think you'll agree is quite dramatic. And what this shows is that pockets of deprivation clearly persist, and that any kind of borough-wide data on, for example, wealth are only ever going to tell part of a story, as many in this room know very well. So in such circumstances of precarity and inequality, local social support networks tend to bear the burden of managing livelihood insecurity. And these community support networks include voluntary and community groups, sometimes working with bigger organisations as well, including food banks, drop-in services, advocacy, and financial or debt services. So last summer, in between the lockdowns, I spent some time mapping community-based social support systems in North Kensington to understand more about these networks. And on the screen you can see just a few of the groups who were involved, and there were more. And I know that the Community Resilience Group was involved in this here, along with the Volunteer Centre and Age UK, who were also very significant. So from this period of research, two factors very quickly became clear. Firstly, the innovative ways that groups made use of their capacity, spaces, and people to meet the new challenges of COVID-19. And secondly, the importance of the legacy of Grenfell. Much of the community response was initially organised around food. Food banks and food delivery for those who were shielding, vulnerable, or who had also now lost jobs or other support networks due to COVID. But it quickly became apparent as well that food was not just about food, but that it was also about establishing a support network. So people spoke to me about how food is a gateway, that when people come to pick up food or when food is delivered, that's when they make contact, when they ask for other kinds of help. That's how we learned how one man had run out of his prescription, she told me. Another had nowhere to go, so we were able to connect him up with new plans to give people accommodation in empty hotels. Sometimes when they were delivering meals, that might be the only time that that person would speak to someone during the day. So it's always about more than food, she said. We're filling in a lot of gaps. And then there was also a strong sense that although community spaces had to close, that did not mean that they were inactive. Many of these places turned themselves inside out, going out into the community instead of having people inside. And so one volunteer reflected that the difference between this, and he means COVID, the difference between COVID and Grenfell is that then we opened our doors to people who came in, and now the help has to be taken to them. The speed with which these local networks got off the ground owed a lot to the emergency response after Grenfell, and the forms of network and solidarity that came out of the tragedy. Particularly strong here were connections between faith groups, as well as between different kinds of organisations that might not previously have thought of working together. So just to give two examples, the local Gurdwara and the Methodist Church, or a mosque and the NHS. So this was from a comment from someone who works at Al-Manar, and he said that, you know, the first thing we did when we heard about COVID is that we got in touch with our networks, with the people who we'd worked with before, and they said, you know, you've got experience of doing this from Grenfell, so can't we use that experience now for COVID-19? He said, we had a meeting on a Friday, and on Monday we started. The confidence of that response came from our experiencing with handling the Grenfell fire. So what we see here is an incredible community response to filling gaps in livelihoods that were made more insecure by COVID. This response has also been very joined up compared to an enthusiastic but more fragmented response elsewhere in London, in Tottenham, for example, where there weren't these pre-existing networks and relationships to draw on. So just to reiterate that this project is very much still ongoing, but I think what we can see so far is how a positive side effect of the Grenfell tragedy has been this booming confidence among community groups to take on difficult challenges, to help people deal with the kinds of precarity that I mentioned in the first half of the talk, and to work together. There's now great capacity in North Kensington, and this needs to be recognised. But these groups are always working on a shoestring, sometimes day by day. They are also dealing very much with the consequences of a crisis. That is, the effects of long histories of insecurity and unaffordable housing and insecure livelihoods. And these have been intensified by the pandemic. This is not a sustainable model to deal with complex and intersecting challenges that really get to the root of these issues. Secure quality housing is crucial not only to health outcomes, as we have seen during the pandemic, but also to building resilient neighbourhoods over the long term, with the capacity to withstand crises such as COVID, and also to plan for the future. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Dr. Smith, and please do join me to thank Dr. Smith for a wonderful time. And we thank you again for doing research in our borough, and hopefully if we can adapt to you, just keep doing research and to improve the quality of life in our borough, that would be wonderful. Your your speech was really interesting, and you've mentioned a lot of stuff that we wanted to hear and to learn from, especially about the housing and the history, and to, back in the day, to women to come together and try to save the Seljusta Seljusta Road public house and the wash house. That was, going back to almost 100 years. And I think there was always a struggle, whether it's current time or in the past. But also to mention that RBKC is the third highest borough that has a residence in temporary accommodation, actually 1 in 29. And I will come back to that, hopefully, to ask you a question about the solutions that we can do in the long term, but also the importance about the food, and not just food, but to use for as a support network to help those who are loneless and those who may not actually meet people. Otherwise, they have been delivered to food, and I think we've gone through a lot, and a lot to mention about the gentrification and what has happened in the demolition and the making of the Westway itself after the World War II. So once again, thank you. But my question to you is, if we are not proud of to be the third highest borough that have people outside of its borough and in temporary accommodation, maybe inside and outside of the borough, but in temporary accommodation, what do you think, thinking about the housing crisis in the country, what do you think is the solution for the long term, like a borough of ours?
It's a very big question to answer in a few minutes. But I would say that any solution needs to come very much from the bottom up, from the grassroots, as it does from top down national planning or policy. I think it's very important that residents groups have a voice, that they are the experts in their own living situations, and that they are involved in those plans and those policies. More practically, I'm sure you're all familiar with conversations around a Green New Deal in the UK and what that might mean for local councils and the commitments to building social housing that is carbon neutral, that are very much part of that agenda. So that might be something to think about in the future.
Thank you. I may have plenty of questions, but I will leave it to the members of the committee to ask you questions. On my right-hand side, I have also Councillor, the Vice Chair for the Select Committee, Councillor Greg Hammond, followed by Emmerdon Court.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, Connie, for your presentation. You started to answer this, but I'm quite interested in the comparison with Tottenham. You're obviously doing the research in both places, and clearly Grenfell is unique to us. But how different are the two places from each other, and how similar?
Also, a very good question. So Tottenham is part of the borough of Haringey, which, although not quite as divided, shall we say, socioeconomically as Kensington and Chelsea, still has very, very big distinctions. There it's between the west and the east, and so Tottenham is in the east of the borough. There are also other kinds of issues that connect the two places, I think, in quite interesting ways. So, for example, one of the estates where I've been working was slated for a very big redevelopment regeneration project, and that, as councillors probably well know, was caused a very big upset within the council and a kind of dramatic overhaul of personnel, of strategy, of projects. So we could potentially say there's some similarities there when it comes to planning and regeneration. That estate is also right next to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So that huge influx of global capital, of sort of media spectacle, has very particular issues for people there that is very different, I think, to North Kensington. And in some ways there has been some trickle down from that, but perhaps not as much as people would like to see. So there are similarities, but also some big differences too.
Thank you, and this is very much my subject, so thank you so much for bringing this to my first meeting at Housing and Communities. I'm sure you know, as I do, that Haringey, certain wards in Haringey are very low on deprivation, multi-deprivation, as indeed are we. And I think we had joint porous wards for a period. and now we have one neighbourhood in the ward I represent, which has actually got worse. So there are connections there, despite lots of other differences. But I was going to bring up, as far as your research is concerned, and I'd be interested to talk to you outside this as this is ongoing, about housing estates or housing generally, which has resulted from community activism. We have a long history of this here. And I don't know if it really counts as community activism, but the Henry Dickens estate, where two of our councillors live, was built by Henry Dickens. He was the grandson of Charles Dickens, and he was part of the council. But he saw, it was the awful deprivation there, and that was when it was really, really bad. And it was a bomb site, and it was built after the war. And so there was that one. So that doesn't necessarily count as community activism, but he drove that personally, which is interesting. And then we had, after the Notting Hill riots and so on, and the Rackman era, and it was a combination of community leaders and church figures and so on who set up Notting Hill housing. And we have an awful lot of Notting Hill housing still, so that was definitely started by activism. And then Wallington Green, which is the first post-war estate, which is to be redeveloped, and that was started by some of the elderly members remember them. They were called the ladies, and they were called Lady This and Lady That, and they were people who'd go out and work in the community, and they actually got the money together to set that up. So from a different kind of community. Which is interesting. And then finally, the most fun one for me, I think, actually, Swinbrook Estate. Henry Dickens' Swinbrook, now run by the council. They're very nicely laid out. But Swinbrook Estate, it comprised rows of, they were poorly looked after, Victorian terrace houses. And after the Westway arrived, they wanted, the people demanded development. And at the time, council weren't listening, and they managed to get the council to change their mind by locking 33, I think it was, councillors in a church hall overnight. And they wouldn't let them out until they changed their mind, which indeed they did. And then they built Swinbrook Estate, which is a beautifully designed estate, I think. Interestingly, Henry Dickens and Swinbrook are two of our poorest estates. Quite frightening, actually. Malnutrition, everything you can think of. And Wallington Green, similarly, obviously, it's changing because they're doubling the population now with private rented and sale. So that's changing a bit. But I think all of those have been, to a certain extent, I won't talk about the council ones, have been subverted. So Notting Hill housing has been really taken over by a development mentality, and Wallington Green, which is run by Cashless Housing, the same, and that change has happened quite radically in my lifetime, and I'm sure there will be future social housing provided by activism. But I think the history of activism here is quite, and I'm sure it happens around the country, but in North Kent, I think it's very interesting, and I'm sure you've known quite a bit about that. So do you have any feeling about how estates emerge, if they came from community activism, and how they've changed? Are you looking at that, or not really?
Yes, I am in part. So I'm glad you mentioned Henry Dickens, because Charles Dickens actually wrote quite a lot about North Kensington and reported on what he described and others described as the potteries and piggeries. And so that quote where that appears comes from a much longer interview. So of course, in just a few minutes, I've just given you a few headlines, but that actually came from an elderly woman who lives quite near to Henry Dickens, who basically invited me around for tea and pulled out her own personal archive of North Kensington, and it's quite impressive. So she taught me through the history of Henry Dickens in great detail. So that, I totally agree, it's a really fascinating example. And Notting Hill housing as well. I wasn't aware of the history of Wallington Green, so that is a really interesting one.
So yes, it was Swinbrook that was that was built after they locked the councillors
Yeah,
in. And Wellington Green was the ladies, yeah.
Wellington Green was the ladies, yeah. So
Yeah,
both of
it
those,
was Kensington Housing Trust at that time.
so both of those are new to me, so I'll definitely follow up those histories. But as you said at the end, I think what's really important about this is not just to uncover interesting or surprising histories about place, but it's exactly what you said about, and I'm glad you used the word subverted, about what happens over time. And I think that strong sense, that's what I mean by being in place, or an in-placed sense of a housing challenge or a housing problem, is that you can't help but see, and in fact you shouldn't see, the issues that you're dealing with as somehow out of time or out of that bigger context. And I think those histories about how the, certain intentions with which local neighbourhoods, with which social housing estates were built, it's really important to see how that can be mobilised in different times, but by different politics, by different agendas. And I think that, for me, is a really strong part of this.
Thank you. Any other question to Dr. Smith? Yep.
Just a
Councillor Rata.
comment, really. Dr. Smith, thanks for your report. Really good to see. I'm very pleased to see one of my voluntary organisation, Khalsa Jatha, is part of that support relief group, and very pleased. Just a quick question on your comment made about top-down.
Councillor Rata, can you remove the mask so we can hear you?
Yeah. So on the top-down and bottom-up approach, do you think that council would have their own approach to deal with their own crisis, or like a region-based issue? I mean, the report predominantly looks into London, but it might be different if that would be, I don't know, maybe Sheffield or somewhere, it would be entirely different. So do you think the council should have more powers to do the approach, or?
I think it depends very much on how it's initiated. So I think, if we look at themes around public consultation, around participation, of course those are already written in to many planning systems, regeneration models, and so on. I think the question arises about whether it's meaningful and at what point it happens and how much effect it actually has. So I think of course, it's not to say that everything can be done by communities themselves. That's obviously not possible. There has to be a facilitative system, and of course not everything is possible, and communities are not singular. They have their own disputes about what should be done, where money should be spent, and so on. So of course it's a fraught issue. But I think what is quite clear is about how channels of communication can be opened up in meaningful ways. And so there's ways in which different places around the country have done that. So, for example, now that I'm based at the University of Manchester, I've learned a huge amount about the history of cooperatives, which really are fundamental to the development of housing in Manchester. And so that co-op movement is very much about working in a collaborative way across local councils and local people. And of course, those are not different, right? Look, councillors are also local people, so we don't have to always wear that hat. You can switch between hats, and I think that's also important as well.
Thank you. I was going to say, if you have any question, Councillor Smith, the lead member for housing, please.
Yes, thank you, Constance. That was really fascinating. I didn't go to university, but if I did, I would have wanted to read history, and it's really interesting to listen to what you've got to say and also what Councillor Dent-Coates got to say in terms of the history. And just as an aside, Charles Dickens got married in St Luke's Church, which is on Sydney Street, about 50 yards from my home. So clearly there was a lot of close connection. So I want to really sort of ask you a question about gentrification and the impact on our housing, because we do have some very, very unique challenges in this borough. And in fact, because of the big difference and because of the factor of location, which equates itself to very, very high values, the number of people in temporary housing, I don't recognise the number, maybe it incorporates some people in private housing, but at the moment it's 2,300 people that we have in this borough who are in temporary accommodation, 75% of which are out of borough. So only 25% of those people. And annually, I mean, we've launched a house building programme, which is the biggest house building programme this council has ever done. But it's only 600 homes. And it's only 600 homes because we're building on every single spare bit of land that the council owns that won't involve decanting or displacing any residents. And the top-down approach to that is that we are consulting with our residents on that. And the residents feel, and I'm quoting some lovely ladies in Edenham, you know, that they're like sardines. They do not want any more housing in RBKC. So that presents us with a bit of a dilemma as to where you put the people. So my question is, what do you consider to be the balance or the most important factor of whether or not people should be in a really good, secure, quality home for access, with access to services, or be in their community? Because there is that difference in terms of whether or not we as a country and as London should start looking at pan-London, pan-country approach to provide housing for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, this is a very thorny topic, and there definitely are no easy answers. I can see the attractions of pan-London or pan-region housing projects. I think one of the dangers of that is it becomes effectively a larger scale decanting program, and so you build houses in places that becomes a sort of out of sight, out of mind situation. I don't think anyone would want to follow the model of, say, Paris, which has a very strong history of doing that to disastrous effect. Space is a huge issue, but I think, to me, this is where the historical perspective comes into play, because these things are not fixed. And I think to return to the question about the differences between Tottenham and here, one absolutely dramatic difference is the amount of private space in this borough, particularly private green space. There is no private square, private garden in the whole of Haringey, I don't think, hardly any, certainly none in Tottenham. And I think those kinds of questions about who has access to green space, who has access to supposedly public space that turns out not to be public, it's not just about housing. It's part of a neighbourhood thinking, about neighbourhood planning, and about development of place. So, and the histories of that are, as Councillor Dent-Coad has just stressed, that some of those are direct action, locking councillors in chambers. That could be one option, not one that I condone. But we have other histories, say, of thinking about how we might open up privatised spaces, open up green spaces to forms of social engagement that are much more inclusive. So I think it doesn't have to be an either-or. I think there are issues here that are much more subtle and go in. That's why I say I don't think you can look at housing in isolation. I think we have to think much more deeply about quality of life, about social networks, and the way that people themselves want that to go.
Where do I put the 2,300 people who are in TAM, predominantly out of borough? Where do they go? Simple question.
I think that's your challenge as the Director of Housing.
Yes, I mean, because the reality is that there will be a lot of people on that list that will never ever be able to have a home in this borough because we just don't have the space. Unless we build on our garden squares, and I'm not sure that residents would see that as a solution.
Some residents.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Final question. Okay. It's interesting, but let's keep it brief to one question each, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was just thinking of a borough that is in a more extreme position than we are, at least I think it is, and that's the City of London, and they have a lot of property outside the borough because they haven't got any room inside the borough. So what do you think about that as an example?
Well, I think as with all of these questions, it's partly about a model, but it's partly about how that model is managed. So of course, there are ways that this can be done in a way that maintains social networks, that is inclusive, that enables better quality of life. And I think one of the things we've seen in the last year is that, you know, potentially many Londoners are moving out of the city precisely to enable better quality of life than they can afford in the city. So it's not to say that everyone has to stay put, but it's about how that happens. So I think that could be an option depending on how it's managed. I think there's possibilities in that, but that's what I wanted just to highlight are also the dangers that it can become a kind of decanting exercise. So I think it's very much about balance.
Thank you. And final question from Councillor Bakhtiar.
Thank you, Chairman. I was here to listen, but I would like to take advantage of Dr. Smith is present and ask a good question. I think I have always been thinking about this. We haven't been traveling for 18 months, but before that, I've been to many European countries, and I see the quality of the council and housing association accommodations is fantastically good in the Scandinavian and in Germany specifically. Could we follow this model? Is there a way we could achieve such a thing in the UK?
There's definitely examples from all around the world of really great practice. I think it depends on commitment. So I think if we look at the amount spent on social welfare in Scandinavia is significantly higher than in this country, and that encompasses housing and many other factors. So that requires serious will and commitment for that to happen. There's also other kinds of models that are much smaller in scale. So I mentioned cooperative housing, co-building projects, which is about, again, taking a different kind of approach, so enabling, so for example, a colleague of mine is studying a project of a group of people in Manchester who formerly lived in Manchester, who through various grants and other kinds of finance raising have started their own co-building projects where they're building very small cooperative housing of about 6 or 12 units. So that's not to say that should be rolled out everywhere, but there's different ways of exploring different kinds of possibilities for housing that can both come from a kind of Scandinavian, very high-level welfare model, but there's also these much smaller scale possibilities as well.
Thank you again, Dr. Smith, for your time and the interesting discussion for this evening. I'm sure this will be remembered, and if senior officers will have opportunity to get in touch with you, we will pass the details so that you can stay in touch. Thank you so much, and once again, thank you for your time, and join me to thank Dr. Smith. It was really interesting discussion for this evening about housing and communities and the quality of life, as well as the food and support network and the TA accommodation and the challenge that our leadership have, which is to make sure that we rehouse people, but also at the same time deal with the residents' complaints. It's not an easy situation that everybody's been, but that is why we have leaders, and leaders have to come out with a magic bullet to fix what is going wrong and hopefully to get the job done. A bit of history in the meantime. I think if we go back to Councillor Kim Taylor-Smith mentioned this, and we are grateful to mentioned several times before, and we're grateful to the Mayor of London for giving us the funds to at least helping us to build 600 homes. And we're always grateful to grants to build homes, the biggest in RBKC's history. But I think going back to the history, we need to build a lot more than that. And I think the government should give us money. And I'm sure the councils across the country would appreciate funding from the central government to enable us to build homes. Let's say 1.6 million homes were built in the late 40s, early 50s, and 1/3 of us were living in social homes. And that's a bit of history from my side, since we were talking about history earlier. And I think we can always go back to the glorious years of allowing everybody to have a decent homes. And on that note, thank you all for your participation. We move on to the next item, item 6, and that's a housing revenue account and capital delivery program. As ever, we're grateful to the leader of the housing, the deputy leader of the council, and the lead member for housing for his ever presence when we need to scrutinize his portfolio. And this item has already been talked about before, back in 7th of December 2020. Luckily, my vice chair was present at the time to take over from me because I was sick of COVID at the time. But thank God, my family and I both recovered from that, as well as others have already recovered. And my prayers and thoughts are those who have lost their loved ones through COVID-19. I would like to welcome Councillor Taylor Smith to speak on this item, and welcome any other officer who wishes to contribute will do that after him. Councillor Taylor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you're right. It was 2020 when we last reviewed the capital programme, and it's fair to say that it's been quite a journey since 2020. But one thing remains the same, and that is that it's no underestimate to say that, you know, that good quality homes and leading the way on health and safety is our #1 priority away from Grenfell. So it's worthwhile just recapping that in March 2018, you know, the TMO, when we took back housing management, suggested that addressing the disrepair in our housing stock would be tens of billions in order to bring it up into standard. And we've conducted a lot of surveys and have a much, much better understanding of what our housing and homes conditions are and what we need to improve. And we approved 267 million in 2019, and the latest business plan in March added another 107 million to that. So we're now up to 374 million pounds. And to this, you need to add the expenditure in order to meet our zero carbon commitment. So at the moment, we're talking upwards of £500 million in terms of investment. So that's why it's obviously absolutely vital we get this right, and this report goes into some of the detail and key factors that are required for us to do that. I think it's worth it separately mentioned in the report about Lancaster West. I mean, Lancaster West is addition to the figures that I've given you, and we're very much progressing now on our ambition to create a 21st century model estate. And that's going to inform our wider programme moving forward. And the scope of works that we're doing at the moment extends obviously to very much the greening of the estate, and we're looking at, again, details will be coming forward, this of a district heating network. And these are all, as I say, lessons that can be learned, partly of which has been funded by a grant, you know, which credit to the team there of 20 million from central government. And this is something which, as I say, will very much inform the narrative on the whole. I think I'd also like to just talk a little bit about engagement, because co-designing the services for our residents is really very much at the heart of what Housing Management and Doug's team do, and this really does come back to the cliche of doing with rather than doing to. And so from the design and procurement through to the completion, the capital programme team have factored in consultation with our residents at every step, and it's important to record that obviously after all this is the residents' money, and any debts that are incurred are going to have to be paid back effectively from the rent. So it's obviously absolutely right that they should have a decisive say on how we're going to conduct this refurbishment, and we're committed to do that. And I regularly attend meetings with residents' meetings, and I'm delighted to see that residents and officers are working very closely together on our housing stock. And it's something that I think we can be proud of and we should continue to encourage. So I very much hope the committee will join me in recognising the hard work that our officers are doing. And however, as you see on Appendix 1, there is a lot more for us to do. Touching on sustainability, again, it's in the report. When the council announced the climate emergency, it was very clear that our housing is going to be one of our biggest challenges in the borough. You know, because our average home was built in, you know, pre-60s, and 75% is either listed or in a conservation area. So we've yet to determine what the cost of that is likely to be. But early estimates suggest it could be another £100 million of cost to do that. And so again, there's going to be really difficult decisions to meet these lofty ambitions. You know, encouraging residents to give up their gas hobs, for example, is going to be something that's very unpopular. It's something we can do when properties are becoming vacant. We can do that in terms of greening, but you know, it means that we're going to obviously very much look at how we transform our lives over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And it's up to all of us to do our bit, but before it's too late. I'd also like to just touch on the leaseholder implications of this, because we need to recognise that the scale of this investment is going to have a significant impact on our leaseholders, and that recovering costs in accordance with the terms of our leases is also a really important component of the funding of the programme as a whole. And in October 2021, we're proposing to bring forward some decisions outlining relief and support that we can give to our leaseholders in terms of repayment officers to lessen the burden, you know, recognising that these could be big bills that are going to be difficult for people to pay. And so some residents and members have suggested we shouldn't recharge leaseholders, you know, but because the costs could be really quite significant. And whilst I have sympathy for those likely to face the big bills, again, it would be very unfair to our tenants. You know, unfair because, again, they have to pay their rent while the leaseholders have got to pay, obviously, for as far as the upkeep of their buildings. And it's unfair that our tenants would not be able to afford to buy their home when they're having to pay back 100% the cost of the repairs, etc. So making sure that this deal ends up as fair to leaseholders and tenants alike will be a key consideration over the course of the next 6 months. So really, tough decisions, Mr. Chairman, but to conclude, I hope you would recognise the good work that's ongoing and our recognition that there's still a long way to go before we realise our ambition of having a model estates and benchmarked quality property that everybody can aspire to. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any officers that will be able to go after you, or?
No, we're here to answer questions, though, Chair. You've got myself, Doug. I've also got Peter Kane, who is the Assistant Director of Property Services for Housing as well.
Before we go into this question and answer on this item, I would like to, as we all know, the Housing and Community Select Committee puts its core to the residents' participation, and I think we need our residents to participate and contribute to scrutinizing. Of course, as the lead member for Housing just said, they will have to pay for it after all, and I think it's good to hear from them. And now I would like to call, before I open for questioning, I would like to call a resident. His name is Trevor Mostyn, and he's a leaseholder and the Secretary for Nottingwood House RA. So Trevor, I would like to welcome you to speak up to 5 minutes regarding to this item, and after that we will be open for question and answer.
If you can hear me. Thank you very much, Chair, Councillor Kasim Ali, for inviting me to give me the opportunity to present our case. It's very kind of you. My name is Trevor Mostyn. I'm the Secretary of the Residents Committee of Nottingwood House, and I also am a leaseholder, one of the flats there. We live in a beautiful 1930s Art Deco neoclassical building called Nottingwood House on the Clarendon Road in W11. Built on the site of a brewery, so it didn't replace any buildings itself. It's a very fine structure, this building, of elegant brickwork, which is as robust today as it was when it was first built in the 1930s. The flats in Nottingwood House have high ceilings, high Georgian-style sash windows, arches in front and back, traditional soundproofing, pretty and secure for children internal gardens with a fine lawn, security entry phones, box hedges, other beautiful plants. It has an excellent 1930s fire safety features of construction and layout with balconies in the front and the back. According to a local architect, Nottingwood House is an example of 1930s architectural excellence and elegance, a view shared by many people who have visited us, including some councillors. It's surrounded by 1960s buildings to the north and east, which I fear do not share the same fine-grained quality of Nottingwood House,
which has retained its close relationship with the public realm and the traditional relationship between family homes and the street. I should note that the preservation, according to our local architect, the preservation and refurbishment of existing buildings has a far lower carbon footprint than replacing them with new buildings. Some years ago, a local architect responded to the council's earlier consultation on stock options with a proposal for an additional floor of flats at roof level, which would fund improvements, principally the introduction of lifts, also serving existing flats. Now, the second point I want to make were the telecommunication masks, which have really terrified many of our residents, both leaseholders and tenants. They're very frightened of these telecommunications antennae, which now dominate the roofs of the building, which have been poorly erected, poorly secured, and poorly earthed, and are an obvious conduit for lightning and consequent fire. We dread, of course, a repeat of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The installation of this massive communication system on our roof has also caused damage to the delicate covering layer that was supposed to protect Notting Wood House against leaks and damp. Huge sums of money have recently been spent on the roofs, as we tenants know. After many years installing the communication system on the two roofs, the company belatedly remembered to install a protective lightning copper cable, perhaps aware of the dangers that befell Grenfell Tower. The height of the aerial spikes made it very likely to be struck by lightning, since the aerial conducts many million volts. We'll supply evidence for all these points. Thirdly and finally, our basement. We are very eager to develop the large, totally unused basement area at Notting Wood House for residential meeting and social activities and events. But the council consistently finds any excuse, such as safety and disabled access, to prevent us from developing it. The basement legally belongs to us. Councillor Marwan Al-Naghi recently explained to Doug Goldring, the Director of Housing Management, the residents would like the space to be turned into a community centre rather than remain derelict. The centre could have meeting rooms, training facilities, and space for other activities beneficial to the community, and could possibly be rented out for some income for its upkeep. While recognising that there would be a health and safety issue and issues around complying with the recent disability laws regarding access, these may not be insurmountable. The basement, I should point out, is asbestos-free. The intention of the Residents' Committee is to apply for funding for the development possibly from the Grenfell Recovery Fund, if given access to the basement space. We're in touch with an excellent local architect, and we'll put in a formal proposal which will also indicate how we'll overcome council concerns around disabled access and health and safety considerations. I should add one more note, and that is that we are pursuing the possibility of self-management for the entire building. So to sum up, our concerns are the dangerous antennae on our roofs and our wish to open up and use our huge basement area. As we have noted, Notting Wood House is architecturally a very fine 1930s Art Deco neoclassical building, which we believe should be cared for and enhanced in order to uphold the quality of the Clarendon Road area. We hope that the Council will support us, and I'd like once again to thank the Council very much for giving us the opportunity to make our statement. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. To join me to thank you. Trevor, thank you very much for taking the time to come to our Select Committee and contribute. As a Select Committee, we always want to hear from our residents and to take their point on board. So thank you. You can remain your seat just in case you may need to ask a question later on. Since there is no mic there, there's no mic there, so you can remain your seat and no speaker will be after you. So you can sit where you are. If you have a question, you can ask later on. Now I would like to open the platform to our Selection Committee, Councillor Emerson Court first, Councillor Dorey second, and Councillor Hammond will be third.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I do want to support our resident here, Nottingwood House. It is quite exceptional, and I visited quite a lot of people in the building. It is, the interiors are wonderful as well. It is quite special. So I hope you get somewhere with that. I just had 2 points on paper A6. And one of them was, I was looking at the list of all the things which are going to be done over, hopefully, towards the end of the year. It just seemed like an awful lot, and I'm just a little bit concerned that we have the capacity to do all this work, given, do we have enough people, enough contractors to do the work, and the materials. There's a massive materials shortage of all kinds of things. So I'll leave that with Mr. Goldring, I think. But I'm particularly concerned. I saw this key decision coming through, which Councillor Taylor-Smith just referred to, which isn't coming through until October, and I'm sure it will be consulted upon. But the line that caught my eye was existing options need to be reviewed and enhanced to take account of higher invoice values for leaseholders. This is obviously potentially up to £120,000. And I'm wondering where on earth this could happen. There's no report to go with this yet, of course. Where on earth that amount of money could potentially be charged to leaseholders, and how on earth we would deal with it if that was true, because that means ruination for any leaseholder. I can't imagine anyone having that access to that. So that I found that was a huge concern, and I'm just curious as to where it is, if we can have some guidance on that. Thank you.
So if Peter could answer the first part, and I'll answer the second part, if that's okay.
Good evening. The question about capacity, both in terms of staffing and materials, is a point well made, and one that we grapple with continuously. You'll see in the paper that we talked about the capital delivery team and our ongoing recruitment, and it is a real challenge, especially as we're doing quite a lot of non-standard stroke mechanical and electrical work. And what we tried to do was to reassure in part by saying that it's a continuous exercise that we're carrying out to try and get people both permanently but also on an interim basis, because as we all know, this programme isn't going to last forever. So we need certain resources to do that, and that's something we do continuously. At the moment, if we continue along that path, we will have the resources that we require to deliver this year's programme. And as you'll see from the profile, that's going to increase. So that is an ongoing piece of work that we're carrying out. And it's not just about employing people directly ourselves, it's also about falling back on consultants, etc., for extra capacity. So that's how we're dealing with that at the moment. As regards to materials, that is a major issue. You just have to look in Construction News and other, and just listen, have your ear to the ground to know that there is an issue about materials at the moment. And it's not all materials are hard to get. There's some of it's an issue about pre-ordering, so that's about planning. And we've actually got a dedicated planner on the team now whose major job will be about making sure that we work with our suppliers to keep on top of that, to make sure that we don't run short. But obviously there is an issue about potential shortages as well. It's something that we're very mindful of, and mixture of planning, working with suppliers that we're constantly challenging about their ability to bring materials in, as well as general availability as well. So yes, I mean, you know, bingo really, those are major challenges for delivering a programme of this sort, especially when the volumes aren't going to be consistent for a very long time. So we've got to be mindful of proper planning to make sure that we don't overbuy, if you like, on a permanent basis and have other problems further down the line.
And I mean, certainly, I just want to echo what Peter says, our perpetual recruitment to ensure that we've got not just staff that can, on paper, do the job, but people who are the right side of the fence, if you like, for what we need to deliver for the benefit of our residents is super important, and that's why lots and lots goes into recruitment, because it's key for what we're doing. In terms of the very high costs for leaseholders, just to give a bit of background, so there has been a number of meetings with members of the leaseholder panel and the home ownership team to work through some possible proposals to the policy changes that will come in October. And on the 7th of June, rather than talk about them all the time, we pinned ourselves down at leaseholder panel to bring that paper in October, because it's around expanding what we've got at the moment. And what we've got at the moment is okay. In comparison to other boroughs, you might be able to, you can repay over 10 years and in certain circumstances have a charge on the property. But we haven't had to deal with bills this high, and these are mainly around one particular estate. We have told the leaseholders on that estate, which is Silchester, where the costs in terms of the infrastructure to the towers on Silchester is significant. And we probably, I'm hoping, I can't prejudge what's going to be in the paper or what decision the local authority will make, but certainly for those higher bills, we will be looking to make that as generous as we can without it being a blatant subsidy, because we are aware that for leaseholders it might mean that they have to spend that, pay that over a considerable period of time, or we look at longer charges or various equity changes that we could make. That is to be brought in a paper to leadership in October, and no doubt the committee would like to scrutinise that.
Yeah, you have a follow-up question?
This is Silchester, which, I mean, nobody could possibly sell next to the shrouded tower at the moment, which makes it even more complicated, I imagine. I mean, the homes are worth pretty much nothing already, I guess. I'm just speculating here, but...
I would say, I wouldn't say they're worth nothing, Councillor, but everything has a value, and we feel that after the works are completed, the building will be fit for quite a few years to come, and will add value to the asset that we own, and these works are essential. We have spalling concrete that needs to be managed. We've got lifts that need to be replaced. We've got pipe work that leaks. It goes on, and it's got new windows. There's quite a lot of work that needs to be done there. But we do understand the concerns of that group of leaseholders, and we have met with them separately to work that through. There's no easy way of dealing with this, but we do need to be as considerate as we can be but still remain within the confines of ensuring that housing revenue account money is properly protected.
Can I just sort of chip in? I mean, again, recognising, Emma, that we really do appreciate that these are really, really big bills. I mean, the issue, if you look at Silchester, these are tower blocks that are 50 years old. We don't have a sinking fund, and that's something which I think we have to explore looking forward in terms of cyclical maintenance. If you look at that, 50-year-old, it's £2,000 a year rather than getting a £100,000 bill at the end of it. So I think that's something we'll look at the range of options and come back in terms of how we might give relief. There are other forms that we've seen being used elsewhere about buybacks and all sorts of other things as well. So we're going to obviously have to look into that very closely. But the fact of the matter is that we have a statutory responsibility to recover cost in accordance with the terms of the lease. I mean, that's where we stand legally, and how we do that is obviously going to be the issue which we will come back and report to this committee about the range of options. But it's a big issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the record, the amount of the bill that 120,000 Councillor Imogen Codd has mentioned, it's not actually on the report. From what I gather here, it's not on the 10.1 or 10.2, but it's directly relevant to that, when it's been mentioned, the leadership team will look into this for approval in October 2021. So the figures are not here, but the key decision will be implemented on that date. So that's just to make that distinction. Is that clear?
Yeah, the key decision will look at the policy in terms of the relief that we will offer to the leaseholders when we start putting bills out. So and that's in terms of the policy that we'll bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
And just to say, I think the actual award of the contract for Silchester will be around about that time, and that will equally be at leadership. So it might be able to work together, if you like, in terms of the scrutiny that you give it.
This is an opportunity perhaps to revisit early next year or late this year for another scrutiny session. But thank you. Councillor Dorish Matlim, you next for question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got actually, if I may, ask a quick question of Mr. Mostyn first before I can direct the question to Councillor Taylor-Smith.
Yes, you may do so.
Mr. Mostyn, I was interested, obviously, in what you had to say about Notting Wood House, which is actually part of a complex. It's an estate of similar blocks. On what basis did you or your fellow residents conclude that the antennae are badly set out and positioned, considering it's not a council matter?
Sorry, on what basis do I conclude that the building's badly managed?
No, you said that the antennae, the communications masts are very badly positioned and so on.
We've sent Councillor Ali some photographs and some videos as well to show how badly they've been earthed. I mean, I'm not an expert in these things, but a lot of photographs have been sent to the council showing how I mean, if you look at the masts, you can see that they're sort of gouged into the top of the building in a very clumsy manner. And as I said before, the earthing was, as far as I can see, more or less not there at first, but that was reported to the council and then they were secured. But I understand, I'm not a technical expert, so I can't really give you a very good explanation. But what I've picked up from those who do know, that the antennae are very poorly established, plus the earthing as well. And to be honest, quite apart from that, it's quite scary having these vast, great antennae all over our roofs quite suddenly, attracting lightning. We actually sent a few videos to the council showing what lightning does. And I'm sure that lots of people here know far more than I do. I have no real scientific knowledge, but clearly if lightning struck our building, Notting Wood House, it would be devastating. But I do understand from those who've looked closely and taken photographs which have been distributed of the earthing and the way they've been implanted on the roofs, that the workmanship is very, very poor. Sorry.
Right, I'd like to now direct my question or questions to the leadership team. First of all, thank you very much for a comprehensive report. At last we can see good progress in all the buildings that is obviously badly needed. So thank you very much for that. First of all, given what we just heard from Mr. Mostyn about the antennae, and apparently pictures and videos were sent in, can we not put pressure on the companies, which obviously the leading mobile phone companies, to do something, put pressure on their contractors? So that's question one. Seems to be straightforward, to push them into something and for them to explain why it appears that they didn't do a good job. On the question of net carbon zero, what I'm curious about is exactly how it's measured and what the yardsticks are. Obviously energy efficiency is a good thing, and you can do that with better insulation of windows and buildings. It's all obvious stuff, although bearing in mind we have to watch out for ventilation. There is a risk of having very insulated homes having mold grow in them. So what is the yardstick in this context? And it's on paragraph 5.2 and later on as well in your report. So if you could comment on that, on those 2 points. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I've got a third one. I apologise. It reminds me of what Mr. Mostyn said about community space. I was told by another councillor of, for our northern wards, I don't remember, it was the estate in Nottingwood House, or another one where it was a similar question, where there is space available, it could be converted into storage, and it isn't. And I just wondered if you could comment on that too. Thank you.
Shall I deal with the environmental and then I'll leave you? I know there's been changes in legislation as far as aerials are concerned, so I'll leave that one to Doug and the storage as well. So if we just look at, referred to in my report, Lancaster West, which is a good example of greening. I mean, that's the first one we're actually going to do. So the benchmark really comes from the assessment of the existing building, and we take heat maps and all the other bits and pieces to put a rating on that building, and then obviously the remedial work then goes to address that. It's fair to say that even with our new build, it is very unlikely we'll get to net carbon zero on our existing builds. And that then gets us into the realms of things like carbon offset, which personally I always think is cheating, but that is something where we're going to do. So I think I'm being a little bit reticent in answering this question, because we could spend a large amount of money on these old buildings and never get to where we want to go. So we have to look at the basic, simple things, and those are heating and insulation, and then obviously the use in terms of utilities within those buildings, and that will be our primary function. Doug, aerials?
So I think it would be fair to say that the mobile phone base station contractor on Nottingwood has created quite a few issues for us as landlord in terms of their installation, and they have created damage which they then had to go and fix, and they've caused leaks to people that are there, and we are certainly in liaison with them and to ensure that when they carry out work that they should be letting us know, because we want to inspect it, especially given their track record. I think though the wider issue around phone masts is one which isn't a positive one for residents, and that is that companies can install phone masts on our buildings whether we really want it or not, and we've just recently contested a case which we were unsuccessful in, where we were trying to refuse that, and that links back to the telecommunications legislation and the rollout of 5G and the fact that people need to get connected. So it is difficult. We can't prevent them from being put on tall buildings, but what we can do, and what we are certainly doing now, is to ensure that there is a proper system for them carrying out improvements. Problem is they don't always follow it, and they will have things around clauses which allow them access in emergencies, because if your phone goes down, then they have those access rights. So, but agreeing that sort of code of practice is where we've been up to this point. It may be worth, Chair, if you wish to. It's a debate in itself that we could bring in terms of that legislation at a later meeting if it suits.
You want to follow up? Yes.
Follow up on that. Also, the question of converting available space into something useful. But I just want to go back to the antenna thing. I appreciate that if they want to put them up, they put them up. But the question is doing it properly, tidily and safely. And it sounds like this installation meets none of those criteria. And can we do anything? Do you have any powers to press?
Well, we think it does now. I mean, there have been problems in the past with that, and Mr. Mostyn has made those clear. And we have had things like roof leaks to people below because of the way it was installed. We have a process now which they're meant to go by, and we're hoping that they will follow that. This isn't a standalone. We've got lots of mobile phone masts across the borough, and there is a process for managing those on site. So I'm hoping that there won't be any more problems. I mean, aesthetically, it is a concern at Nottingwood. I can definitely sympathise with Mr. Mostyn's view, but that's the situation we're currently in. So we would definitely, certainly on Notting Wood as well, because of what's happened, we are giving it extra attention for when the contractor wishes to do anything such as an improvement. And on storage, so the real issue, I'm sorry if it came across, is things around DDA compliance and safety are our primary concerns. And I'm really pleased to hear that Notting Wood will be working with us and looking at getting some seed funding, because I think the costs of conversion is what the main issue is. So to convert something that meets all those regulations, and safety and disability access is significantly expensive. And if we can work together where you have some seed funding and maybe some match funding from us and other organisations, then we might be able to get there and achieve the aim of a community room. But it isn't without its challenges. In terms of other areas which are vacant and turning into storage space, we've got a couple of requests, and again we're looking at how that might be funded. We're very keen on additional storage. We've been quite robust with residents in terms of what's left in communal areas. We're also quite strong on what's left on balconies. So people need places to store stuff. So we definitely have that very high up in our agenda, Councillor.
Irene, I think you wanted to follow up.
Thank you, Chair. It's just regarding the 5G mast on the building. I think it's a national legislation, the Digital Communications Act 2017, which bypasses the local planning law. So they have more power to install. I think I've been working with my fellow councillor, Thalasitis and Amanda Reid, that we exchanged a couple of emails where we could mitigate some of the problems faced by residents like that we... Right.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Thank you. Councillor Greg Hammond.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, thanks to Mr Mostyn for coming to present to us. Very interesting to hear the history of Notting Wood House. I spent a rather nice afternoon there during the 2019 general election canvassing the residents, but now I know a little bit more about it. And I wish you success with the projects that you've outlined, the ambitions that you've outlined. Turning to the paper, thanks very much to the Deputy Leader and the officers for the presentation. As I outlined in the full council yesterday when presenting our Select Committee working group, I think we all recognise that this council's got a mountain to climb in terms of bringing the stock up to scratch. But the investment that you've already put in and are putting in is on the right track, and it will make a significant difference. So well done for what you're doing. On the specifics of the paper, Councillor Smetterling raised the greening and the sustainability and the 2030 target. So at paragraph 5.5, you outline where you've moved since the last time we saw this subject a few months ago, and clearly there has been some significant progress in the last year. But how can you tell me how far you are along the road to making this a proper plan as opposed to an outline on a piece of paper? What's the timeline for action in turning this into a costed action plan? So we know what technology we have today. So I'm going to answer that with a sort of. So I will answer your question, but the difficulty with that is we know what technology we have today. That isn't necessarily the technology we will have by 2030, and lots of it is. So what we're concentrating on is ensuring that the fabric of the building is brought up to the right standard. It's difficult for us to second guess what sort of heat source we're going to have across the piece. We are starting with Lancaster West in terms of a large-scale air source heat pumps that will then heat people's property. Now that we suspect will work, but I suspect they will also get better, and I suspect that the other forms of energy such as hydrogen or biogas or whatever may also become as competing elements to it. So when we're sitting there to try and work out
well, how much is it going to cost and where we're going to get to, it is a little hard. So what we're concentrating is being able to cost up what the fabric works will do. Some of that already links into what we've already got in the capital programme. But just taking us aback, so when we met in December, we said we were putting a strategy together. That strategy came to leadership in February of this year. We split that work into 5 separate subgroups, all with a work plan, all with actions that need to be taken, all headed up by various senior staff to make sure that we get that, and all coordinated under our internal housing, we call it zero carbon board, so we can give it some drive to try and move that through, because it's quite a challenge to get all of this done in this period. Even though, you know, we might say it was 9 years, but it's still given the size of the challenge, it's huge. I can believe me. So that's what we're doing. We can share details of that. Although I was Chair, I was advised that we have been reporting on that to the select committee that looks at environmental services, and we have actually attended there to give them an update. So we're clearly happy to do to ensure that people can see the transparency of what we're trying to do. But within that, it's not just about our buildings; it's about what we do in terms of how we operate as a landlord, and how we green our fleet, and how we deal with electric vehicles on our estates and so on. There's lots and lots of things in there. There's about 50 different things that we need to do. So we've got an estimate in terms of the fabric, which was around about 100 million, but a lot of that is already, some of that is already accounted for in some of the works that we're doing. So what I intend to get to by hopefully, I'm going to look at hopefully around about autumn or September even, is an understanding of how much of that is duplicated and how much that might actually look like as additional, just for the fabric.
Thanks very much, Doug. I think that's gone to my second question, or my supplementary as well, is what does that mean for the budget bid for next year and subsequent years, because 9 years isn't a long time, and I don't need to see all the detail that you've shared with the Environment Select Committee, certainly not specifically for me in answer to this question, but it's not a long time, and that's 9 budget rounds between now and 2030. How much are you expecting to put into this year's budget bid on this? I'm sorry, how much effort are you expecting to put into this year's budget bid on that subject? Don't quantify it.
So in terms of the overall financing, we said that we would come back to leadership in the new year with a plan to demonstrate what we can and cannot finance and how we will finance that. Of course, if it's another 100 million, that puts a significant pressure, and then you have to think about how given our limited income, how you're able to finance that. So we have we are looking in conjunction with some experts in terms of financial assessments on the viability of what the housing revenue account can afford, and I think that will be a factor that comes into that. And will produce it. Will come out as a paper as part of the budget setting at the end of the year. So we will have those facts for that period. But I don't want to say that, you know, if it's a huge figure, then that will create us quite a concern. So we're going to have to wait to the end of the year to work out what that will mean for us and how we will then have to plan going forward.
All right, thanks very much indeed. I won't press that any further, but we'll return to it in a few months' time, I have no doubt. And thanks very much to you, Doug, and to all the team in the housing for the excellent work you're doing.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Arun Irati.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got multiple questions which might be linked, but just a question on the 650 new development housing programme. Do we subsidize the land cost for the RPs, or do we retain some units? Oh, because we provide the land to the RPs or the housing provider. No, is it purely done?
So the
where new homes are being delivered on land that we own, we are the developer. And so where RPs are developing, they're doing it on land that they've either owned already or have acquired in the market. So the two things are separate from each other, if that makes sense.
Thank you. If there's no other further questions, I will summarize, and I also have a question about the figures, the money. We've tried to follow the footpath of the money. The lead member for housing and the Deputy Council leader mentioned in 2019 we had 267 million pounds for the plan, but that plan now is 374 million pounds 2021, and we're looking upwards of £500 million. That's 500 million pounds, as if I quote the leader of the lead member for housing. Thinking about this, do you think now we haven't had the real effect of Brexit and COVID? And I understand where you're coming from, these figures, but almost doubled or close to double. Do you think we will go really up for £500 million in terms of the real effect of COVID and Brexit, which has been surprisingly overshadowed by the pandemic?
I'll start and then Doug can finish. If we look at phase one housing, the 4 sites that we've got, that threw up a number of, 2 of the properties came in a lot higher than what we had originally assessed as far as our QS team was concerned. And that was a real worry, one of which we've now gone back and we're re-tendering with a different company, and the anticipation is that we'll bring it down. So clearly the indication that's given to us is the impact in both material and labour costs, but not just Brexit. It's obviously to do with COVID and the effect of the pandemic having an effect on us. And that is a worry going forward. You know, these things fluctuate all the time. Doug, do you have a sort of view on?
So, in terms of the tenders we've had back thus far, we've had a fair few. I think it would be fair to say they are a bit above our budget estimates. I don't know the exact figure. I think it's upwards of, up to about 20% in some cases. But there have been some which have been around budget, our budget figure prior to tender. But I think you're right. The pressure is in one way at the moment. So that is an additional factor into our financial planning and our predictions about how much money we're going to need as we go forward.
Thank you. In terms of what we have just talked about, and again I thank Trevor for his time. We've talked about the antenna and not having the power to refuse. But what about if they damage properties? And as we now have the case, what can we do about it?
Yeah, so on this particular instance, they went back and fixed it. But yes, I mean, ultimately, even though they're allowed on our property, and we can't stop that, they have to abide by health and safety rules. If not, they are in danger of being litigated against in extreme circumstances. Really, what we would like them to do is, if they have to be there, is act like a good tenant.
Trevor, if I come back to you to ask, this is a question to you. Do you think when it has been fixed, is it okay now the problem has been resolved, or is still you feel that there is a problem with the communication antenna and the way they have fixed it is not properly done? Do you still have an issue, or the issue has now moved on?
Well, to be honest, Councillor Ali, I suppose the real issue is nobody likes having them on the roof at all. The issue of how badly they've been done is obviously our priority, but most residents would love to get rid of them entirely, because people are anxious about the danger of lightning. They're also very ugly, but I mean that's a secondary consideration. But people are worried about the security issue, really. But the first thing, if they have to stay, clearly we would like to make sure that they are properly installed and refurbished. It seems to me these companies seem to live as Doug was saying, that these companies seem to live by a law of their own. We don't seem to have any influence over how they behave. But
Sure. There are things we can do as a council and as a scrutiny committee, and we've got the lead member here for housing, and a policy that we cannot overturn, or maybe central government policy. So in this case, yes, please, I will welcome.
I should add that we also are inspecting the sites on a much more regular basis now to just check that they're in the right condition. So just to check that if they have been up there and we didn't know, that we're checking it, that it looks that it looks like it should do.
Thank you. And you have mentioned that you've sent him any information that was CC'd to me, and it was meant to for the housing management team. But if necessary, I will be able to pass that information and share with the select committee members. In terms of the storage, I believe we have some sort of agreement that you will work with the management will work with you, and we will find a solution to the storage issue, is it?
I think this was the community room. The difficulty we've got is funding to do, because it's not an ideal, for us it's not an ideal building that you would use, so it's got some difficulties in terms of access and refurbishment costs, and right, but I hear very much tonight that they're very keen on this, and they're going to put their own plan together, and we will help them with that.
I look forward to that, working together, and hopefully find a solution to that issue. And in terms of the safety of the antenna, perhaps we will be able to visit some properties, and the selected committee may well actually be interesting to have a look at the safety of that area, and to see if they have any questions. And we will definitely include that. Once again, thank you for your time. I think we will move on from this agenda item, but just to recap what has been discussed, and I think we just add back to the figures. In 2019, the figure was 267, but now 2021 we're looking at 374, and up and upwards of £500 million. And the reasons are for the pandemic, and of course the Brexit has its effect, but we will find out the real pressure of the financing when the country reopens, and I hope we will do so in due course. The architect, the excellence that has mentioned by Trevor, and the communication issue with the antenna and the lighting, the danger to lighting, and the basement is the community center, that I hope the management team will be working with him, and of course subject to financing, but there will be, if there's a will, there's a way, and I hope both the RA and the management will come to this point. In terms of the 120,000 invoice for the future work to be done, we will be revisiting this issue in the autumn, October and beyond. And also again, Councillor Dorish Marshalling asked about the antenna issues and the carbon zero. The lead member for housing mentioned that we may, even the new build properties, we may not meet the target of carbon zero, but the council and the leadership is doing whatever they can to do to get the carbon deadline being met in 2030 by the council. On that note, we will be moving from this agenda item, and then we will go into the last agenda item for us, not the last, but the second last one, but because of the last one will be any other urgent business. But this will be a select committee work program. Again, I would like to thank and follow the example that Councillor Kim Challen-Smith given for the officers, the work that they have been doing, and the excellent work that they continue to do for these difficult times. And once again, cordial to welcome you to the council. Of course, now by now you've been second month. I hope to continue your good work. Thank you, officers. If you wish to stay, you can. If not, you're more than welcome to head home, and we will continue our second last agenda item, and that's A7, Select Committee Work Program. I wish to welcome one of the senior officers. If I may welcome you, Paula, to speak up to 5 minutes on this, just to give us a brief of what we have done in the workshop program that has been chaired by the Overview and Select Committee, Councillor Mary Tress, who's sitting at the back. We always thank you, Councillor Mary Tress, for your work and the workshop that you've organized for all the chairs and the Select Committee program. So, Paula, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides some information about the development of the work program for scrutiny, as you just said, and this started with a consultation seeking feedback from residents, councillors, the council directorates and partner organisations, and that led to the production of a long list of topics that, as you noted, the councillors had a first opportunity to revise and to think about the key priorities for the Housing and Community Select Committee at the scrutiny workshop on 7th of June. And the result of that conversation is reflected in the short list of topics which is included in this report. The report also asks that the Select Committee now further reviews the short list of topics to build a work plan for housing and communities which is robust and which allows for the topics to be scrutinized with the necessary depth. So it's important to note that in doing that, in selecting topics, members must have regard to the statutory guidance on overview and scrutiny, which notes that scrutiny should have a clear role and focus, and that to achieve that, there may well be issues that scrutiny wants to look at and nonetheless are not selected. And Chair, just to finalise, the next step would be for you to build on the consensus that arises from the conversation that you have today, to then make a formal topic proposal for this Housing and Community Select Committee to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 8th of July. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for your contribution to this and for stepping in today to present this report. I also welcome if Councillor Meritres wish to say a few words about the work program. You're always welcome to say what you wish, since we're going to meet on the 8th of July for the final, but also now I will open the platform to the selective committee members, but you're more than welcome to say a few words.
Yeah, can I just say, I think what we have to do, or you have to do as a committee, is you have a really good shortlist, but you have to kind of interrogate it and choose the things that you think are most important to the residents. But I also think that councillors do well when they're looking at things that interest them. So there's a balance between, when you kind of hone it down, the things that really matter to the residents, but also listen to the committee and see what they would really like to do. That's what I'm going to say.
Thank you. We've talked about housing and communities. Since we have one of the officers here, Michael Kennedy, from the community side, and the first item of this agenda is Grenfell recovery as well as COVID recovery. So Michael will be coming to ask you to contribute the food insecurity which you have been dealing with for the time being, but I will like to welcome Councillor Greg Hammond to ask a question about the work program and to see how he sees the selection of the 7 items we have.
Well, it's not so much a question, more just putting some ideas on the table as to how we refine this and starting a conversation off. And I quite like the phrase or the division of most significant and most concerning that we got, and grading things on that matrix that was on the previous table that we on the previous page, but we saw that at the workshop. Grenfell recovery, obviously we've got to have that in during the year. We need to track the progress with the housing and the elements that are part of this committee, but recognising that the OSC has the overview of the whole Grenfell programme. But I think COVID recovery in this year is something that we can't not do, and there's a big communities angle to that. So I think they both fit the most significant and most concerning categories. I think the third one down on the list there, the New Homes Programme, housing supply, I think it's important that we do that. We did it once last year, we need to do it again. But I think the last bullet on the printed list, the placemaking, which Tom brought in, I think that is very much linked with the New Homes Programme. I think we could do that together. And that would be probably quite a good themed meeting for the two of those subjects. Fourth one down on the list, the 2030 target. We've just heard a bit about that. And it is, one could say it is primarily the Environment Select Committee's lead. It's very interesting, but if we were going to drop one, I think that would be the one that, because it's got the other committee working on the whole thing, not just the housing angle of it, that's possibly something that we might not do. I'd put a big pitch in for the next one down, management of temporary accommodation, because we didn't do that last year, and I think it ought to be done. It's the 2,300 odd people who are perhaps easily forgotten because they're not a lot of them aren't in the borough, but they want to be. And how is that programme managed? I don't know enough about it. I'd like to hear more about it. I'd like to have a paper from the housing team on the whole subject, so we can explore it in some detail. Repairs, we started tonight. We did have a very good theme meeting last year on that, Cassie, which I know you watched online, and I think there was an opportunity there for residents to participate in it. So we could consider doing that again, albeit we've discussed the paper tonight. Not on the list, though, fire and building safety, there was a very good paper we saw last year, but it's a work in progress, and it might be an idea to have that one again with updates later in the year as a single item on an agenda. But I'd particularly like to do some visits, and we've talked about that earlier today, but not only to do a grand tour of the properties, but actually to do something useful with that tour, as in specifically looking at getting a briefing on fire safety in some of the specific buildings to test what we've been told in the papers, because it's one thing to read a paper about fire safety, but when I was in charge of the facilities, I did weekly visits around different sections, and I used to look at the fire safety every week, and I think actually having a look at it is something we ought to be doing. Final couple of points. We need to leave space in the programme for the executive's report on our select committee report, which will be coming in, I guess, a few months' time or a few weeks' time. So we need to have a section to probe them on what they say to us, especially if they try and row back on anything. I've got a feeling the executive weren't wildly enthusiastic about our recommendation 1 on the Housing Act 2004, the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and I don't think they should get away with that. I mean, I might be doing them a complete disservice, but we do need some space to question them on that when it comes around. The conference, I think we did that last year on our initiative, and it was very good, but I think in this council year, it'll be the forum, the Housing Providers Forum, to a Registered Providers Forum, opened up to us and others. So it might not be one of our formal meetings, but it would be an opportunity for us to join in there, and that's probably something that we ought to, as individuals, take a lead in being at. And then there are quite a lot of key decisions coming up in the housing area that we ought to be looking at this year. So there's quite a lot there, not all of which are specific items for examination, but there are things that are going to go onto our agenda for the different meetings. So I know Paola was taking notes there, and I'll shut up and listen to some other ideas now from others.
Thank you, Greg. In terms of the last year's, the way we've done scrutiny, themed scrutiny sessions have worked for us, and I think we will do it similar again. For example, we have scrutinized Grenfell-related issues, and we've dealt with both housing and communities at the same time under one agenda item, and I think we will do the same this year if we can do that. However, we had a working group, an excellent working group chaired by Councillor Greg Hammond, and we've managed to get that to get a working group report, which we have presented yesterday actually to the council. And we have another one coming up that has been chaired by Councillor Doris Martling, and that will be completion of the new, the completion of the modular housing, and just to make sure that we will get that report as well to the council. So we also include that item just to complete to the modular housing report, so that we can present to this select committee, let's say in September onwards, or in September could be, but at the same time to get that to the council meeting in latest perhaps December, before the end of the year, so that we get out of the way this year. So that will be important to finish off that working group, as we've talked about during the brief meeting and beforehand. COVID-19 recovery is a huge topic itself, and I would like this year to the working group to be on the communities, specifically targeting the COVID-19 recovery or COVID recovery at the same time response, because we hope that with the end of the COVID, but we've said that last year and we can't take anything for granted, but hopefully we will not go back to a response. We will have a working group or COVID related issues rather than Grenfell, because of the inquiries going on the other side. I think we'll do COVID-19 recovery on a working group, who will chair that meeting. I don't know if somebody wants to volunteer at the moment. If not, we will wait for the next meeting until we have all the other councillors who can't make it today to take on that opportunity. But if there is one happy to take it on the task now, more than happy to work with you on this and get other councillors. But we can do this by email. As Councillor Greg Hammond mentioned, I think we will continue the similar way of we've last year, and the theme meeting works with us, Grenfell, the new homes and placemaking go hand in hand, and I think that can also be done. Repairs, TA accommodation will be the top of our agenda, and I think we need this for the second meeting, TA accommodation, and to get the reports in and out of the borough, with the third highest, as you've seen, just behind Haringey Council. So that will be important. And the fire and building safety is, we've talked about this, but I don't know why it wasn't on the notes, but we've talked about this, and that will be included. Any other officer, any other select committee member wish to contribute, more than happy to hear from you. Councillor Emerton-Court, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've just been working my way through the papers, and I wasn't sure where some of these topics came up, but anyway, when we talk about temporary accommodation, I put a question in because it's something I've been very concerned about. It's just the policy actually of buying homes outside the borough to put temporary residents in as temporary accommodation, and I think we just need to look at that and why we're doing that and if that's working. But also I asked for a bit of demographic information about who lives. I mean, anecdotally, I believe that there are more BAME families living outside the borough. Why has that happened? But we need to know the facts there, and it would be really helpful to know if that's just because of the people that I know, or if there's something else there. If indeed it is correct, but also the makeup of the family makeup, and it's not 3,200 people, it's households. So what is the makeup of those households? Are they single? Are they large families? As I say, obviously people who come for help are people who need the help. So I hear some bad cases, but there are some bad cases, people sent into inappropriate accommodation. So I'd be very interested in getting a bit more detail about that and what it means to be in temporary accommodation, because some people are in it for up to 13 years is the longest I've heard, and I think we need to look at that. The empty homes, I'm just wondering, there was something I was looking at the other day. If you add up second homes, empty homes, and registered Airbnb in the borough, if I've added this up right, it's like 40,000 homes that are not lived in permanently. That's an awful lot of people. So I don't know if I've got that right, but the short-term holiday lets is about 6,000, and they're going to, once, if we ever get rid of this pandemic, that's going to hit us big time, because there'll be more people wanting to come in, and people who want to let their homes because they need to make more money because they've all been hit economically. So I think I'm just wondering if those should, empty homes and the short-term let should be in one looked at in one sense. I say homes that aren't lived in regularly. There's some other very good ones. I'm interested in all of these, really. There's not enough hours in the year. Thank you.
We've taken that on board. Councillor Arian Irati.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, as I said in our meeting before, I would like to add the leasehold structure for the existing homes, the future new build, plus the collaboration work with the housing association and the RPs. How are we going to do the leasehold calculations or structure, you call it? I would like to add that. May not be a working group, but maybe a report where I've got some ideas around how we can cap them. So that will benefit the new leaseholders. Then, thank you.
Thank you very much. The leasehold structure and housing associations connected, isn't it? Those two.
Collaborative leasehold
Collaboration,
structure,
okay.
yeah.
Right. Councillor Dorey.
Thanks. I just would like to endorse the comment about the fire safety, because there is something in the previous paper which concerned me. This is not the place, I think, to raise it, but it's something to monitor, where it says, and I just want to quote the sentence, the continued drive, 7.3, the continued drive to tighten legislation around fire compliance compounds the increase in costs alongside other costs, increased costs identified. The thing is that I don't know how one defines fire compliance, because we know from the Grenfell Tower fire that there was compliance with the then rules, although we also know that some of the suppliers of materials lied about the compliance. Nevertheless, what is fire compliance and what does it cost? So we have to, I think that's why it's definitely worth examining this question as we go through the year, because how do we judge what's right? 10 years ago, what was right was not adequate, but how does anyone know that? So I just want to endorse that, and bearing in mind my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the fire and building safety is important, and definitely will be taking that on board in due course. However, we've gotten the list now a little bit longer than actually expected. So we as a committee decide what we have done last year, which is to deal with 2 to 3 items in one under one themed agenda item, rather than picking and choosing one from another. Shall we do that similar way we've done last year? For example, when we're looking at the new homes, we will also look into the environment as well as making place or placemaking. Shall we do that similarly? Do we have that go ahead? Then we can cover at least 3 items under one theme rather than going from there. The second important we've talked about is the fire safety and building, the fire and building safety is another important. We can perhaps take an updated report. Since we have looked at this last year, this could be an updated report. It does not have to be from the scratch. TA accommodation, we've looked at last year, but we also looked at empty homes. So perhaps we can revisit the empty homes, but also give the emphasis of the TA, terminal accommodations or temporary accommodations, and those who are living in the borough and 75% out of borough, and to look into the issues, how it can be sorted out. Yes, please, go ahead.
I would say on that one, I think that it could be a meeting where we cover both subjects, both empty homes and TA. But I think we need to have a paper on TA from the council so we can question them on it.
Absolutely.
And I'm certainly up for linking Airbnbs with empty homes as a subject, because that's more planning department than housing, but the housing department need to know about it.
Really, I think that's such a meeting. We've already covered now almost 6 item agendas in 2 meetings by having a themed meeting, TA accommodation, Airbnb, as well as people who have empty homes or empty properties. That can be looked into one meeting, and I think that will give us an opportunity to have under one theme. So basically what we have here, the items we have here, we can actually cover more or less leaving out the environment out, because we will allow the environment select committee to take the lead on the environment issues, the carbon zero. So if we remove that item and replace with perhaps the temporary housing associations that we've already dealt with under your chairmanship, Councillor Greg Hammond, in terms of the healthy homes. We can also revisit what the leadership has implemented and what needs to be done, and that we can be due course late this year or early next year. So, and the leasehold structures, that also goes with that agenda to see whether the leasehold with temporary accommodation, the housing associations or the council, and I think we can both cover in one meeting rather than dividing the agenda. So all in all, what I'm saying here, themed meetings worked for us well last year, and we will continue to do so. Councillor Arian Rati, you want to speak?
Sorry, I was just checking where is the leasehold included? I mean, for which one, sorry?
The ones that you have on the table, whatever we do, we have two overarching themes, and that will be Grenfell recovery as well as COVID recovery. Everything we do will go under these two main agendas, and then within that, we will have we will look into the temporary recommendations. That will be the top of our program and our agenda, as well as fire and building safety. Don't know if you have there. I'm using the one from the agenda meeting. I don't have the paper copy. I have the electronic copy. Does anyone have the paper copy to share with Councillor Arachi, please?
Sorry, please.
Yes, I have the electronic one. I don't have the hard copy. Yes, Councillor Dore.
Thanks. I just want to check or confirm the repairs and capital program we can just deal with on a report basis. We don't really have to have a meeting on it. We can just get a progress report from the department, can't we?
Yes, we can.
Because we know it's in hand.
Yes, we can. However, if there are questions, specific questions, when it comes to the key decision, we can look into the November, like the 120,000 has been mentioned. Those important details and invoices are really too big to deal with by email. So we can look into this, but we can look into by, let's say, when the time comes in October, November, as a key decision, because we have to have a key decision for each and every time we have opportunity, because of them, we have to work with the leadership, and the leadership work with the scrutiny, so that the travel, the direction of travel is the same, rather than pulling different directions.
Okay, that's a specific aspect of the program, but the overall program.
Yes, we can always get email updates, and we can do that. Yes, I agree with you.
Well, we've just had a paper on the overall program, but I think if there's a key decision later in the year that's relevant to that, which I think there probably will be, that might be one to discuss in the committee, rather than having another paper on the same thing, because we just have had it probably wasn't as detailed as last year's, and it didn't involve, I don't know how, we did have quite a few residents, didn't we, last year online? I know I was chairing it, but it's a while back now. But that's the only advantage to doing it with a theme meeting with lots of notices. You can get lots of residents in to give their views and ask the questions, but we did do that in the not too distant past, like I know it was last council year, but that is actually only 6 months ago. And there's lots of other things to cover.
Okay.
Just another point on Arian's point about just reflecting on the leasehold questions and registered providers. I think when we're invited to the public registered providers forum, which that might be a question to put to the panel at that point to see what they have to say.
Absolutely.
And I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if Paola's got a view or for when that registered providers forum is going to be open to us. I know they're meeting monthly, but which one they're planning to be the open meeting, where we particularly and other councillors will be invited along.
I'm afraid I don't have that information, Councillor Hammond, but I can look into it.
Probably be a good idea to get that in our diaries relatively early, because it won't be one of our standard committee meeting days. It'll be a different day that they're doing that, and it'd be good to plan around it, because last year's was a pretty good event, and I definitely want to follow it up.
Thank you. On that note, I think we have our topic selected. In terms of food security, although we cannot ask a chair to come forward and to deal with this, Michael Kennedy, will you give us 1 or 2 minutes, just an update in terms of the food security? We will be looking into the COVID-19 recovery, and food security is an important agenda for the next years.
If I can work out, yeah, there we go, I can. Yeah, so just to clarify, I believe I'm sort of talking about it as an area for future scrutiny, so how it's going to unfold as we see it. Yeah. So I think the way I would look at this is not to focus on the strategy itself, but to focus on whether or not hold on, let me go back a step. To date, I think when we've spoken about food insecurity here, the red, amber, green rating has probably been necessarily the wrong way round. You've been asking questions, are we getting 2,000 meals out, then the meals go up to 2,800. That probably isn't how you would view strategic success in this space. You would like to see that number going down. We do, of course, need to continue to work with food banks to make sure that there's an ecosystem there that can get meals to people. But more and more, and actually going to Dr. Smith's comments earlier, more and more we need to start to think about the underlying causes of food insecurity and how we're working with partners to alleviate them. And the reason I say partners is because realistically, the council, I think it's quite a preeminent council in its local community, but we are still bound by the same laws that any local council is bound by, and we can't go out and solve this problem in its entirety ourselves. So we will have to work with partners in the VCS and the NHS. We'll have to be speaking to the type of people who can help with debt advice and debt relief as we move through the year. And I think so instead of focusing on the strategy, I suppose I would be inclined to focus on the conditions that lead to food insecurity and whether or not and how we're working to alleviate those conditions, because I think that'll necessarily be a movable feast, but a strategy is often a statement in time that we'll fare back to, and it won't necessarily give you the agility that you'll probably want as a committee. And then just to say, I think the other thing to pay attention to as you are planning sort of commissioning on food insecurity items is probably, I'd say, changes to central government policy. So when we get into September and see, provided central government plans stay on course, as we get in September and see the job support being unpicked and the focus moving onto the macroeconomic picture, that will inevitably mean, especially as we won't see the normal seasonal spend through the summer this year, that will inevitably mean people's jobs are more vulnerable. So you'll probably see a spike around then. You can expect to see a second spike probably next winter, as depending on how successful businesses are with reopening through autumn. So it's just, I think there are those set piece moments, sort of September, October, winter next year, and then moving into hopefully a more fulsome version of recovery into next summer, that I think those big policy choices start to impact your work as a committee more than a strategy, to be honest.
Thank you. In terms of the, as you said, policy-wise, we'll definitely be looking into the future areas to scrutinize. And yes, as you said, the council cannot do on its own and work with the partners and the partners that you have mentioned and beyond. Yes, in time we will definitely reach out to you and to the lead members. But thank you for coming along today. From the rest of your team, some of them will leave, some of them could not be there, but we appreciate for your time and staying to the last bit of the meeting. On that note, the list we have here, we've only removed mainly from the environment and the steps to be taken to the Council's 2030 carbon neutral target. That we'll leave it to the Select Committee for Environment. We will work on with them. However, we've decided to, for example, to base making and the new homes to put together. But also temporary accommodation, when we're looking at temporary accommodation in and out of Borough, but at the same time empty properties, Airbnb, we will be looking into the theme that works for us. Fire and building safety is another important. One more thing that we haven't mentioned for the work program is visits outside since we haven't been managed to go out. This year, we hopefully be able to, providing COVID restrictions will be removed next month, and we'll be able to do so. We will organize site visits for those who can do, and that will be in due course. We will just make sure that it's in our work program for the year. If you can make some visits whether it's a lecturer from a university or to go to that site to see modular housing or newly built homes or the current housing estates and how healthy they are. But ultimately to make sure that we as a scrutiny committee can see in real life how our residents live and the areas that they live, is it fit for human habitation? And I think we've talked about this. So on that note, shall we say we are taking on the proposed agenda items that we have here, minus the carbon neutral steps, and we leave it that to the select environment. Shall we agree on that? All agreement? I think we will do that. And on that note, it will take me to the final agenda item for today, and that will be in a sec. A8, any other urgent business? So far I haven't received any, but I think there is none. On that note, we will be finishing the meeting, and since there is no any other urgent business, I wish England to win the Euro 2021, since it's going to be at home in London, and I hope we will keep it here. On that note, we'll just wish for that success, and commiserations to Scotland who didn't make it, but hopefully England and Wales will go through. But I bet on England on this one. Have a wonderful evening to you all, and good evening. Bye-bye.